Okay, for today's podcast topic, we're going to go over wealth distribution as theft. Before we get to that, we're going to ask people to consider donating to my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/challenge history. And it's if you go to the page, you'll see the introduction, and you'll see it gives a little bit of a story with me being on disability, and how this will go to help me earn wage while being on disability, and help cover some of my other costs, as well as paying some money to help with the podcast and keep up with any type of technology that I have to get for the podcast itself. Now, it starts at $1, is $1, $10, $25 for the amounts. There's also $50 and $100 amounts as well, in which we'll have giveaways for those once we reach the thresholds for the amount of people. The $100 will have a gold Byzantine coin giveaway. That's from the Byzantine Empire. And the $50 coin, the $50 level will have a Roman silver coin giveaway. That's from the Roman Empire as well. And those will be coming from AP Mex, that I will be purchasing those from. So that's from a reputable precious metal coin dealer that I actually get all of my precious metal coins and rounds and bars from. I'm not, I don't have any, advertisement with them. It's just who I end up dealing with. And it's just who I end up trusting for my stuff that I get. Now, onto the idea of this topic. That's wealth distribution is theft. First, we're going to go on to AynRand.org. And is wealth distribution theft, and does it matter? And this is from a blog of the Ayn Rand Institute. And it goes, if you spend any time reading on free market thinkers, you'll inevitably encounter the argument that wealth distribution is wrong because it is theft. See, for instance, this article written by economist Dominic T. Armentano, aptly titled "Wealth Distribution is Theft." We're not going to go on that right now with it. On the other hand, the argument is straightforward as to border on the self-evident. You earn the money, and redistribution involves the government taking it by force and giving it to people who didn't earn it. How can that not be theft? On the other hand, virtually no one is persuaded by that argument. I don't mean that they think it's stealing is sometimes okay. I mean they aren't persuaded by redistribution as stealing, so it gives. The answer has two parts: one economic, one moral. Economically, we are taught wealth as a social product, not an individual creation, and the person whom wealth is redistributed is thus one who got an unequal share of society's resources. Morally, we are taught that a person's need entitles him to support by others, and thus, as St. Ambrose put it, you are not making a gift of your possessions to the poor person. You are handling over him what to him what is his. So is wealth distribution stealing? You bet it is. But to see that is not easy. It requires grasping. Wealth is created by individuals and morally belongs to those individuals, regardless of who claims to need it more. And that requires a willingness to examine or re-examine some of the deepest issues in economics and philosophy. And they basically tell you to go on to read Atlas Shrugged to kind of get the idea. Now, when we look on the moral argument, is we would have to go on the idea of where should charity come from, and we should obviously understand that charity should come from the individual, because we have obviously charitable groups that actually exist out there, and this is something that we should understand. This means the government really has no legitimate purpose, and once we understand that, that should be an idea. And even if you start to look at from a religious aspect, and even from the religious aspect, is they've created ten commandments from actually that are actually obeyed by both by Judaism and Christian sects of the religions. And if we go out to the 8th commandment, you see right here, it says right here, you, with it, the actual text shows thou. So thou shalt not steal. And that's right there, the 8th commandment. And that's very, very specific. And there's a reason why, is because it was and it was also, if you go out to the 10th commandment, they use the word you with it, but it was originally thou shalt not covet. Basically, it meant this was another bad trait as well in the ideas. So basically, it was meaning basically the ideas of basically saying, I want this from my this from my neighbor, and I want to basically take this and this and this and this and this. Well, the fact is this was essentially what people were doing. Of what's happening with these people that are going toward the ideas of Marxism, is they're essentially creating a giant wish list and basically saying, I want this, and they don't care who they're stealing from. And this is something that's very, very important to understand, and it's something that's very, very crucial, that it goes back to some of the religious ideas, and it's been embraced by even people who weren't religious, like Ayn Rand. So it does cross over to both religious and non-religious figures. And there's a reason why we don't want this, because to actually get the idea of theft, which is the act of stealing, specifically felonious, and removing a personal property with the intent to deprive the rightful owner of it, which is essentially what we're talking about. And then essentially, how is it done with it? Now, if you don't comply, it's the use of physical force to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy. The intent of violent treatment or procedure. And this is essentially what the idea is with what government is using. And that's what happens if you do not comply. Now this is what is known for the system of what happens in government when government insists on their version of wealth distribution. And this is why what we need to understand is wealth distribution is theft. It doesn't matter how much these people like Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or even anybody else from whichever side we're talking about are discussing it. And I've gotten into discussions with people trying to state that, it's it's morally right to do this. Well, it's not morally right to steal something from someone. And they go, but the system is rigged. Well, that's because our current system is actually, if we look at the current system, it's actually crony capitalism. And the crony capitalism, actually, if we look back at that, it's actually something that actually came about from the progressive era. And that's actually something that was actually embraced by people that were actually on the left. and these people that actually want more regulation. Now, this is actually what created this whole system of greater central control of the economy. And this is what created this whole system that they're complaining about. Now, if they want to actually address it, they could essentially remove all of this central control, but the moment that you start stating these things, they go, no, we don't want this, and they go back to, we want to do more theft and more regulation. And this is the whole point. And this is why we get back to the idea of where we actually have these problems. And they only want basically to complain and to start going after, start basically bad-mouthing the idea of a free market system, because they don't want a true free market system. They want it totally essentially controlled. And they don't care about the morality of theft. They basically say, you have more than I do. I want your stuff. This is where the idea comes from, and it's a totally elimination of what were considered to be the rules of that were actually taught to be beneficial for in the early religions, Christianity, Judaism, and some of the other ones, of basically not coveting your neighbor's stuff. And there's reasons why, because when you start doing that, you're basically advancing the idea of theft. And you're basically saying, hey, they have this, I want that. Hey, my neighbor has a boat that he's not using. I think I should have the right to it. Well, that's not right, because that's not yours. He used basically his personal skills to advance his career to earn that boat that he was able to purchase. You can't use excuses of saying, oh, life's not fair and all these other things. Well, if you didn't actually earn these actual skills, it's your own fault. You can't keep complaining about this, and you have people complaining, oh, but I'm working on this factory. Well, have you actually tried to earn any other skills? Well, if you haven't tried to earn any other skills, it's your own fault. There's options for people to actually earn greater skills, and that's why we have people that actually work their way up. And we actually see this within certain immigrant classes that actually come in that actually have earned their way up. Take for instance Filipinos. Filipinos, there's actually a very, very small amount of them that live in poverty, and yet the average income for Filipino immigrants is fourth highest among all of them, among all immigrants coming to the country, at just shy of $90,000 per year, and that's per Filipino immigrant. And this should be a very, very key thing with it. Now, they're not getting any subsidies coming in like some other groups, like Saudis are, like Indians are, and some other groups are, because they don't have the wealth when they're coming into the country. So they have to deal with it with the ground up. And it shows that these people are willing to work from the ground up and kind of bust their backsides to get up to those levels of income. Now, when we see this is showing that we don't need to use these forms of government aid. We need to stop this, because we see that people are more than capable of earning their own income. And it's basically, we have a bunch of lazy people here that basically just want a free ride. And this is where we've gotten essentially a country of a bunch of lazy people. They've been taught this idea of social justice and Marxism that basically says, hey, that guy has more than me, I want their stuff. Instead of actually teaching people, go out there, get a productive skill, and work your way up, and try to become the best possible work you can, and work your way up as high as you can get so you can become wealthy. And not teaching people that wealth is bad. Wealth is good. Wealth is actually a way of getting security and way of becoming productive so you can actually help out the next group of people. And money is merely a medium of exchange, nothing more. Money is not evil. It's just a medium of exchange, and people need to understand this. Theft is what is evil. Theft and coveting other people's stuff is what is evil. And it's been taught in religion, it's been taught in legitimate philosophy. And this is where we need to understand this. And people need to have an actual duty to themselves to understand where they need to go in life. And I think this is where we've actually had a serious drought in society, is we're focused on these superficial things and these fake moral issues that have basically destroyed society, and it's something that's very, very destructive. And we've gone after these bogus ideas that are completely illegitimate, and it's led us down to more theft and the use of violence by government. And we say, oh, but government's doing it, so it must be legitimate. No use of violence is legitimate. When you're basically saying, okay, if you don't hand over your stuff, you're going to jail. Okay, if you don't go to jail, we're going to shoot you and kill you. That's how this stuff works. That's why we basically say you should be entitled to the fruit of your labor, and that's why we end up saying that that's what is right. You should not be forced to give up everything that you've earned just because someone says that they believe they're entitled to it because they don't want to work. Or they don't want to work as hard as you've worked. Just because you've worked harder does not mean that they're entitled to what you've earned. That means there's going to be no incentive to work, and that's the whole thing. It's you work harder and then they take your stuff. That doesn't seem fair at all. That doesn't seem like a fair system. You work harder, you earn more money, they take your stuff. You work even harder, they take even more of your money and they take more of your stuff. And that's basically the way things go. And that this is why we need to understand that we need less of your stuff taken. It shouldn't be free handouts. And this is why there's an actual moral issue behind this. And it's, regardless if we're talking economically, it's also a moral issue. And St. Ambrose was completely wrong on his statements. You need to go to the idea of Thomas Aquinas with the idea of individual liberty. And St. Ambrose was completely out of his mind when he was talking about these things. And it's basically, you're not entitled to these things. You're not entitled to someone else's stuff and what they've actually earned. You basically, unless it's actually given out of legitimate charity, actually out of the actual kindness of your heart, which is voluntarily given, it should not be done, because you should not be forcing. If it has to be forced, it should not be allowed. And people are actually humans are moral beings. They're not going to let people die. They've never done this in history with it. We've always had some type of solution for it. We don't need this. The reason why we've actually seen such things as wealth distribution is because, number one, people have asked for excessive amount of things, of free things. That's number one, which they're not entitled to. And number two is we've actually seen that the government actually wants more power. And it's not really about the actual situation of helping people. It's about the centralization of power. As we've seen with the progressive era, that they were actually adding on more things that people never asked for. You start to look at some of the things of what FDR was doing, nobody ever asked for any of it. If you look at the things that the activities that Woodrow Wilson was doing. No average person asked for the centralization of banks. In fact, the only people who asked for the centralization of banks were the actual banks themselves at the top, because they knew that they could make a lot of money that way. They were the ones who actually did that. Now, these were the people who actually pushed for it. And it was actually, when we look at these people, those were the ones that actually pushed for these ideas. And the ones that were actually against it were actually people at the bottom. They never wanted it. They never wanted Social Security. They knew that that was actually just theft, and they never wanted the ideas of government health care. That was actually what it called just forced upon them at the start of Medicare. Medicare was just actually forced upon them because they knew the end result was going to be higher healthcare costs. And they knew that from the start. They knew that it was easier to actually just buy healthcare, when eventually healthcare at the start was equal to about $5 a month. And when the government started getting involved, is healthcare ended up skyrocketing, and now it's completely unaffordable because of government intervention. And this is what we get from government theft. And when we get back to what theft does with it, is it doesn't do what it's supposed to, and we're basically, it's just more about accumulating power. And you get these individuals at the bottom who go, hey, I want more free stuff. And basically politicians go, hey, I know I can buy more votes by promising free stuff that they're not entitled to. And this is the whole problem of the whole situation, and we need to understand that. This is not about actually legitimately helping people. If we're legitimately helping people, they go, okay, we're going to leave these charities alone. Let them do what they do best. They're going to handle all of these issues. And what we're going to do, we're going to keep the government as minimal as possible, and let people keep all of their money as the highest amount of money that they need possible. Because what we're going to do, we're going to make sure that these people have the most to donate to charity. Because the fact is that people are very, very giving. Anytime there's people in need of money, people are willing to toss around the dollar bills like it's going out of style. I mean, they're willing to toss around all of that stuff, and that's the whole point. And we need to understand this. So government's not even needed when it comes to any of this. It's just when people start asking for a bunch of free stuff. We want phones. We want free internet. We want free this, that, and the other. We want free food. We don't want people to tell us what type of food we can get. We want free top-notch health care. We want free housing. We want all of this stuff. And then guess what? It adds up, and guess who ends up having to pay for it? People who can't afford it. And we want subsidies for our electric cars. So the wealthy end up getting subsidies for their electric cars, and the middle class pay for it. And this is what this wealth distribution ends up doing. And all it is in the end is theft. And this is what people need to understand, is when everybody asks for a handout, basically the people that end up paying for it are the people that shouldn't. Because you're going to have the people at the top that know how to weasel their way out of the money, because they deliberately pay to make sure that the tax code is very, very complicated. And they are the ones who end up getting the most write-offs. And they could write everything off, and they're the ones that end up paying zero taxes and make sure that they get actually a huge amount of money back. Now, people at the bottom with it are ensured that they don't have to pay any taxes because they're the one who get all the free stuff. Now, the people in the middle end up getting hosed because they're the ones who still end up having to pay a lot of the stuff. And this is the whole problem. When it comes down to tax time, and they're the ones who end up getting usually a huge bill, because there's people who wanted a bunch of free stuff. and that this is who it ends up screwing. And we need to understand, when we understand that redistribution of wealth is theft, and let people keep what they earn, this is what it ends up being. That we can end up basically getting down to a system to where people are allowed to keep what they earn, and we can have charity that goes to the right people, and that's what we need to insist on. And if we go to, it doesn't matter if we go to understanding the biblical system or just understanding that we don't want violence. I mean, we should all agree that basically that trying to shoot someone because they don't agree with having their money taken away because they want to eat, instead of handing someone else some money over because they want subsidies on their electric car, is, I think you can actually agree with that. I think we can actually come to an agreement that someone actually wanting their actual own money is kind of right. And I think we can agree across the board that we shouldn't be giving out, we shouldn't be stealing people's money. Regardless, it doesn't matter if you're at the top or you're at the bottom. Nobody should have their money stolen and given to the government, where the government wastes that money on God knows what. And this is the whole point, and this is why we should totally disagree with wealth distribution. And it doesn't matter what we're talking about, because it goes to the top, it gets wasted by government bureaucrats, because they're always going to hire more of these people. And then when it comes down to it, they're going to basically say, oh, but this is to go for charity. Well, it doesn't go for actually charity. If you actually are interested in helping people, you need to make sure that you have the least amount of people in between the people that you want to help and you yourself. You want to make sure that there's the least amount of people as a third party in between. Now, when you deal with the government, there is a huge amount of people as a third party. That's a huge problem. When you deal with charities, you're going to have a lot less of that. When you deal with the person themselves and give that money directly, you're going to have nothing in between. That's the best option you could have. Now, what we want is we want to get to we want that ideally as the best option. Now, when we look at the situation for what government does, is government's not always going to be doing that. Government's a lot of times going to be wasting a lot of this money, and that's essentially, and what does government do next to what those charities are going to do next to what you're going to do directly? Now, those charities are not going to be kicking down your door, putting a gun to your head saying, give me your money for this charity. I've never seen a charity to date do that. That's not what happens. You've never seen, and you're not going to do that to yourself. I mean, I've yet to see a person put a gun to their head and say put your own money into and give it to someone else, or else you're going to blow your own head off. That doesn't happen. Now does that happen with the government? Yes. The government says basically, if you do not fork this money over in taxes, you go to jail. If you refuse to go to jail, they will kill you. This is basically the way things go. If you refuse to go along with them, they will shoot you, because they consider you to be violent if you refuse to comply. I mean, we even have IRS agents trained with AR-15s. I mean, for what purpose is that? This means that they're actually meaning to actually involve in violent action. This is the only purpose they would actually do this. This means that we have an actual agency that is actually meaning to act in a violent manner to enforce law, and this is our essentially intermediary tax collecting agency that works with the Department of Revenue, or the Department of Revenue, but they work with the Department of Finance, I should say. And this is why when we talk about the idea of what we should have for going forward, this is why we should end this whole madness of stealing people's money for public aid. We should completely end all forms of public aid and all forms of corporate aid, all forms of foreign aid, and all forms of subsidies. We need to end all of these because all it is government force. And it does. If we wanted to aid these parties, we would do it on our own, and we don't need any of it. And we should talk about more decentralization if we wanted to help people, and that's the best way to do this. And that's why when we're talking about this, we should have there is a moral and an economic argument for both, and it would solve so many problems that we currently have. When we start looking at eliminating all of that, it would basically pretty much our whole budget problem would be solved, because if we would just look at that and then start looking at things from those perspectives as well, when it comes to policy, it would actually change of who we'd actually be beholden to in foreign policy as well. We would actually be looking at things from our actual own perspective instead of NATO and other countries. And this would actually impact what we're actually doing. And this is why it's very, very important to understand this, and we would basically be getting down to what we only need. And beyond wealth distribution with it, we need to understand that it's at the point of where taxation is actually theft. And because the actual outcome, if you refuse to comply, is you go to jail. If you don't go to jail, you get shot. The government uses violent force if you refuse to comply with them, even if you're doing it over moral grounds. They really don't care if you're doing it over moral grounds. They will kill you. And this is supposed to be the government of the people. With it, you're supposed to have some type of say-so in it, and yet we don't. And this is the whole problem. And I'm probably just going to wrap it up right here with it. If you like it, like, subscribe, click the notification bell. Make sure you share it all around social media to your friends and everyone else. Make sure you check out my Patreon page. If you can't donate, share it with a friend who can. And that's about it. And I will see you guys later for my nightly live stream. Bye, everyone.